as we go down through the framework here in financial management, we're really talking about closing the loop. We're talking about, now that we've executed these programs, how are we going to measure how well it performed, and how are we going to use that information to make better decisions in the future? And David talked yesterday about how it's sort of an exciting time within CRM because we're able to bring all of this data together at a consumer level, and that's enabling a lot of the insights and the targeting that we can do. And I'll say the same thing is happening within measurement. So this is a very exciting time right now. There's a lot of change happening within how we can do measurement. And I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see a lot more change of really being able to bring all the impressions, all the data down to the consumer level, which is going to allow us to have a much better understanding of what the marketing efforts are driving and how they're interacting with one another. Okay? This is certainly an area that's a passion for me. I've spent the majority of my career working on this. And there's definitely some things that I want to call out to people that are observations that I've had. So one is clearly measurement is very, very hard, okay? And I'm sure everybody in the room has experienced this in one way or another, whether it's how do I justify my total marketing spend, right, to my CFO? Or how do I allocate budget between TV, radio, print, digital? Or in a day-to-day execution environment, how do I sort of, what keywords I'm buying or real-time bidding, some level of, using information to inform decisions. And I think as everybody gets into it, that getting true measurement is a hard thing to do. And it's not that we don't have metrics. We're swimming in metrics. We have tons of metrics to look at. It's what the metrics mean. So a great example is when you're looking at like a cost per acquisition metric, let's say through search. And you get metrics every day of what the cost per acquisition is through search. And I always talk to clients, I'll be like, well, yeah, but do you believe that number, right? So $50 cost per acquisition, right? And what does that mean? Do you really think that means that you spent $50 within search and you got that customer? And nobody believes that, right? Everybody knows that there's a lot of other things that influence that, but yet that's still sort of the currency that's used, right? So one thing that I would encourage is, really understanding what these metrics are that you're looking at and understand how they're calculated, because I guarantee they're probably not what you really want them to be. And the thing that's really important is the connection between measurement and then targeting and execution, right? So you can't optimize what you can't measure. If you think about this, when we create measurement of what happened in the past, we use that information to determine what to do in the future, right? So if our measurement of what's happened in the past is wrong, what do you think is happening to the decisions that we're making to optimize in the future? Right? We're not starting from a solid foundation. So measurement's a critical foundation, not only to understand what's happening, but to make decisions going down the road. And originally I had this chart with sort of arrows all over the place, kind of like when I'm playing darts and they're in the wall and on the floor. And then I thought about it and I thought, it's actually worse than that. And it's actually worse because a lot of times we think we're doing a great job with our targeting because we're very precise, right? Our metrics are getting better. But the reality is we're missing the target. So one example of this is if you think about direct mail, and a lot of times we use indirect attribution in direct mail. So we'll send out mail pieces, we know who we sent it to, we look at a time window, and we look at who responded, right? And we'll sort of attribute that and we say, well, they responded due to the direct mail piece, right? And then we build models off of that to then decide who to mail next, right? So if you think about what's happening, there's people who are going to buy your product anyway. And what this model is doing is it's just finding those people who are going to buy anyway, and we're just going to mail more of them, right? So if you think about our response rate metric or whatever that is, it's looking better and better and better. It looks like we're doing a great job. But really what's happening is we're just finding the people that we're going to respond anyway, right? So it's sort of we're getting really precise, but we're off target. Same thing can happen within display and retargeting, right? Retargeting is always going to look great because they've already come to my site, they've already shown interest, and now I'm going to hit them with display. And people, of course, are going to click through more. Well, maybe they're going to buy anyway. And if I start putting all of my money into that, I'm not feeding people into the funnel. So, and I'm not against any of these media. They're all great programs. I'll try to pick on each one as I go through this. But I just want to bring out how important it is to think about measurement and how that influences the decisions that you're making. And another piece that, Disney's one of the clients that I work a lot with, and they have this phrase that's really stuck with me is, measurement's a journey, not a destination. And I think that's so true. So, they're one of the clients that has, I think it's 3 years now that they've been on this sort of journey. And they've made a ton of progress. One of the breakout sessions, we're going to talk about, what they've been able to accomplish by focusing on, organizationally, but also the data and infrastructure to support this. But solving this is not a software package, it's not a tool, right? It's not an easy fix. You have to have a long-term view to sort of make that happen. Okay, so what is financial management? So it's how we consistently measure the value of consumer interactions with the brand and how that information is used to make future marketing decisions. And we really talk about measurement as an enterprise-wide currency. So if you talk to anybody about what these metrics are, people know, they all have the same picture of what it means and how it's calculated. So the framework we're going to walk through with this is we have 4 areas. So I'm going to talk quickly around measurement strategy, and then Peter's going to go through measurement attribution, which is really how we do the past measurement, right? Budget allocation and forecasting, which is how do we apply that into the future. And then very important is validation. How do we make sure that the measurement's correct, that the targeting is correct, and evolve it over time? Okay, so with measurement strategy, I want to talk about what components make up a good measurement strategy. And really, we believe that if you don't have these components, you don't have a measurement strategy. Okay? So one component of it is complete metrics. And nothing is out of scope. So this is very important. A lot of the clients that I work with, will have a lot of TV budget, right? And we can do marketing mix models, all that we want to do, and what it comes out is we'll have sort of what's the cost per sale of all of the media, and then inevitably somebody will be like, well, yeah, but TV's not designed to drive sales. It's designed to drive awareness, or it's designed to drive intent, right? I can't tell you how quickly that measurement discussion falls apart when all of a sudden you have whatever, 40, 50% of the budget that somebody just said is outside of the scope of the work you just did, okay? So it's important that piece has to be part of the measurement framework. And it's not that we're going to force and say, well, no, that's the wrong metric to use. You've got to use sales. It's that you have to take that framework and you say, okay, well, if that's an important piece, let's integrate that awareness and perception into the framework, right? And let's figure out the best way to measure how the media is driving intent and awareness, and then how that's driving sales, right? So you have to adapt your framework to be all-encompassing. Otherwise, it falls apart at some point. Another one is consistent application of metrics. And this is like the cost per acquisition piece that I was talking about, which is the metric has to be calculated the same across the board. So if I'm using a cost per acquisition within search and it's using last click, right, and I'm getting $50. And then let's say in direct mail I got great structured holdout tests and I'm getting cost per acquisition there, and it's $200, right? Well, direct mail looks really bad. But actually, we had such a test design. That's the true number of what we want, whereas search is misleading. But if they're not calculated in the same way, we can't really compare across those two. And so, having to really define the metrics, define what they mean and how they're calculated is a critical part to be able to have a measurement strategy. A second piece that we talk about is it's got to be applicable across measurement levels. And by levels, we mean sort of levels of decision making. So these same metrics, should be able to be used to inform a yearly planning decision of how much marketing budget should we have, or how much in TV versus direct mail. But then the same metric needs to be able to go all the way down to the most granular level, the day-to-day execution level, to inform execution. Because too often the strategy breaks down from the highest level of, here's what we need to do, but then in execution they don't have those metrics anymore, and so they have to use something else. So having the measurement that goes across those levels is really important. There's also applicable across dimensions. And what we mean by dimensions is it's sort of like a way that you can slice the measurement across all the metrics, right? So I want to know what the cost per sale is by segment, for example. I want to know what my brand awareness is by segment. I want to know what my click-through rate is by segment, right? So segment's sort of a dimension in this case where we can always sort of slice the metrics by that. And usually you'll have segment, geography, product, that sort of piece. But that really also helps foster, segment as a currency. You can tell that we're, really emphasizing segmentation here. And this is one of the ways that sort of also promotes that as a currency in the organization, because I know that I can always see my metrics by segment. And the last thing is have the right measurement method, use the right tool. So it's, you know, as you look at maybe what a company's using market research for to do the measurement on, sometimes there's other ways that are better used to do that, right? Maybe market research isn't the right thing to do, and instead you can use that research to then go and do more precise or more frequent measurement of awareness, which can then feed better into models to understand that impact. So I think a lot of times it feels like, well, there's a lot of extra cost to build up a measurement program, and sometimes there's cost savings because, you know, money's being spent really on the wrong tool for the job. Real quick on a couple of the outputs. So one output is a metric playbook. Right? So if you think about this, you know, it's sort of like a high level of what the measurement framework is, and, you know, really showing all these characteristics that are in there. And then this would be a detailed book that's also showing how all of the metrics that you're using within each media are aligning to that. So this is sort of an output of a measurement strategy, this playbook. The second one is that you're going to have a timeline, right? So really looking at it over the course of a couple of years, how is both, not only the measurement gonna, but the data, the infrastructure evolve? Clearly there's a heavy organizational component to this. You know, people's incentives are tied to metrics. You know, the people might be in different parts of the country or different parts of the world that you have to organize around. And so really thinking about this and making sure you get the buy-in and the organizational alignment is just as critical as all the data and all the analytics to sort of enable that. Okay, so I just went through sort of a high level. Peter's going to take it over from here and really talk about, you know, a little bit more granularity on how we do this from a measurement and forecasting perspective. So I'll hand it over to Peter.
All right, thanks, Scott. So Scott was covering off on the plan. I'm going to talk about the execution of that plan. And as we're breaking down the plan execution, the first thing we need to be able to do is look backwards. So how do we understand what historical performance was of the different activities that we had in the marketplace to try to drive outcomes? And ultimately, we need that understanding at an incremental level. So what was that incremental value that was driven? We use this word attribution a lot, or you hear this word a lot, attribution, and I just want to kind of make sure we're all on the same page with what we're talking about when we're talking about attribution. So for us, attribution is the ability to be able to assign credit to each of the different touch points that occur kind of within that interaction experience that the customer has. So this could include mass touches, so to speak. So it could be a radio ad that they heard. It could be, you know, a targeted display ad, but all of those things kind of ultimately translate into that customer's experience with the brand. As you know, there are very unsophisticated ways to do this, or kind of blunt instrument, kind of like a last touch or very basic rules to try to figure out how to assign that credit, you know, to kind of much more kind of sophisticated, kind of model-based or, you know, testing-based approaches to be able to do that. And one of the things I want to call out here is, as I'm looking at this 5 years ago, like this idea that I was going to kind of connect all of these touch points together at a customer level and then somehow be able to assign credit to that, you know, nobody was really able to effectively operationalize that. From an infrastructure standpoint, I think as Matt and Ed are going to talk about tomorrow, you know, a lot of the pieces are in place now to enable this. And one of the breakout sessions that we're going to have with Universal Studios, so they're going to talk about some of the challenges and things that they experience as they're trying to build some of this type of measurement from a digital standpoint. So just something to look for there. As we're bringing this data together, this is kind of one of the money slides for us. So a lot of you guys have seen this slide. We fundamentally believe that this kind of represents the right approach to integrated measurement. And there's some different pieces here that I want to walk you through. So first, at the top, you see kind of this top-down piece. Think of this as kind of the broad, you know, it may be your marketing mix effort that's underway today. So this is, how do I look very broadly across everything that's happening, all of the mass media, direct, digital touches that are happening, as well as things that maybe I can't even control as a marketer. So economic factors, competitive events that are happening, or even just the cumulative value of the brand that you've accumulated. How do I look across everything and understand how much credit we should assign to the different kind of media segment level touch points at a macro level? That's great. If we could do that and push it all the way down to that individual touch point, for that last display touch, we would be done. The problem is, because we're using rolled up data to do that, we need another way to really get to that more granular measurement of the specific programs. And that's really this bottom-up component that you see here. So this is taking that event stream information that you saw on the previous slide, and it's building up from that to be able to understand, and often using predictive modeling to understand what those different touch points are. So if you have these two different things, and as you'll see through some of these breakouts, companies can start in kind of different places with these. Ultimately, what we need to do, though, is bring them together into a single measurement system. So you don't want to have 2-3 metrics for the same activity. And the way that we do this is to map that top-down piece into the bottom-up layer. The last point I want to make on this slide is, once you have, you'll know you have integrated measurement when you're able to look across all of the different measurement dimensions. So that Scott brought up, so things like your customer segment, your product, your geography, as well as across the different levels of media, in order to be able to understand that performance. So what does this look like? So ultimately, this needs to be able to drive the decisions that you're making as an organization at the right time that you need to make those decisions. So you may need to understand at a monthly level how you need to adjust your budgeting for the different media to be able to take advantage of opportunities that are in the marketplace right now. At a segment level, so some of the stuff that you saw earlier in the customer segmentation discussion, we need to be able to output for those specific segments what is the performance by segment and what media are driving those performance. And oftentimes we need to be able to see that dynamically as well at a monthly level. And then the campaign piece, you're going to have people who are on the ground who need to make decisions today about, should I continue to flight this specific program in search or display, and have the metrics that they need in order to be able to do that. So if that's looking backward to try to create that unified view of what happened in the past, we also need to be able to look forward to be able to understand, how do you make decisions going forward into the future. There's 3 pieces to this budget, we call budget allocation and forecasting, that I want to call out here. So first is forecasting itself. So when we say forecasting, what we call forecasting is the ability to look into the future, to predict the future based on historical data and your future plan. So as you're looking to make decisions, you need to be able to understand what the impact of those decisions are. The 2 ways that you kind of pull the levers to be able to make those forecasts are through scenario analysis and constrained optimization. Scenario analysis is really kind of analyst-driven or marketer-driven. So this is where you can do those what-if scenarios around, if I change my budget by this amount, or if a competitor XYZ changes their price in this market, what should I expect the resulting forecast to be? And that's very important. And then coupled with that, you need to have the constrained optimization, which is, look, there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? You can't, as a marketer, possibly sift through all of the combinations of options in your head. You need to have kind of a machine-driven approach to be able to actually to do that kind of hard processing for you to figure out what are some of those optimal scenarios, and then you as a marketer or analyst can kind of test those scenarios. So what does this look like? So I think many of us have seen kind of scenario plans, forecasts before. I think what we're used to seeing is something that looks like this. So you'll have, your baseline performance. Maybe this is what happened last year or last quarter. And then you have these different assumptions that are driving these different scenarios. So, and those different scenarios have different amounts associated with them. I think what we're saying that's maybe a little bit different here is, as you're drilling into these scenarios, not only are we wanting to be able to understand how that scenario is derived based on the different media levers that you can pull. So you can see here scenario 1, we're increasing overall budget by 35%, and we're shifting budget from brand TV and print towards more digital channels. But at the same time, as we're making that shift, we need to be able to understand across those levels and dimensions that we mentioned before, what's the impact at each of those. So in this case, we're looking at the dimension of segment, and what you can see here is specifically as we're adjusting this plan, we're pushing money into segment 1 and segment 2 at the expense of pulling back on our marketing efforts to segment 3, 4, and 5. And you might look at that and say, well, I'm executing, I'm brand TV, how am I going to do this? Well, essentially what we're saying is, in some cases, this is more a reflection of kind of what we expect to happen based on shifting our budget. In other cases, through the kind of addressable media plans and things that we talked about before, it's very kind of actionable, kind of at a very tactical level. So as we now drill into a specific segment, we need to then be able to push down even further. In this case, this is an example showing how for this segment we're able to allocate or look at what our estimated spend is going to be for this segment by the different the media that are in flight, and even some of at a level down below that. And as we're making this actionable, that action needs to come as we're pushing it down to as close as we can to the level where decisions are being made. So if we're talking about paid search, we need to be pushing that down to more of like a keyword group level versus brand TV, maybe that's at a program DMA level, for example. I think another kind of important connection back to this customer experience piece. So when Craig and Kevin were up here talking with you about this, they alluded to the fact that part of the input into their process needs to be this kind of adjusted view of the truth at a very tactical level that's getting pushed into that targeting process. So it's not just an input into the plans, it needs to be an input into the targeting as well. So this is a specific example, actually similar with what we are doing with some of our clients, where we're taking some of the actual attribution feed information, where we have kind of that revised weight version of the truth, and then plugging that into the demand side platform that's executing your display, or pushing it into your search bid platform so that they're not optimizing based on last touch, they're optimizing based on a metric that's much more reflective of kind of the reality of what's happening for those specific media. And then finally, validation. As we're looking at validation, one of the challenges with these programs is you're introducing a lot of change into the organization as you're adjusting measurement. And there are going to be winners, quote unquote, winners and losers, right? People are going to be very happy at the new results, and people that are going to be not so happy. So part of managing through that change, as well as just really improving what we're doing, is being able to have a plan for how we're going to validate this. As we roll out new metrics, how are we going to know that those new metrics, to Scott's point, are really hitting in the right place on the target? What are the tests that are going to be put in place? And then as we get information back from those tests, how do we then take that information and then make the measurement better, right? So if we run a test and we say, well, maybe we were shooting a little bit too far off to the side of the target, how do we now shift that back based on what we've learned from that validation test? And then finally, this is kind of a new idea. We're calling this like a normative database. But think of, what if every time you ran a test, one of these validation tests, you stored that information in the same way you were storing the actual data that you have on your customers, where you could go back and track. You leave the organization, somebody else leaves the organization. They can actually go back and see what were the effects of that test, and having kind of that documentation around what you're doing, so that you're not constantly as an organization kind of relearning things that you already know, and are able to build on that. I'll mention here as well, so I failed to mention on the, actually let's go to this, come back to that. So kind of in summary here, just 3 big points I want to make. So first, I think there's a lot that we can do just to kind of get started here, but ultimately we really think of measurement as a currency, right? So by currency, it's one of these universal, it's universal metrics. It's having consistency across the organization in order to be able to drive alignment at the organization. And if you want to have the highest level of impact, you need to be pushing it to that level. The other thing that you can see is it's not good enough anymore to have your analytics organization over here and your technology organization, kind of building things, right? So a lot of what we're talking about requires very tight integration between technology and analytics. And the requirements gathering and actually understanding how these things are going to work together need to be built kind of in conjunction with each other. And the last thing is the value here is potentially enormous, especially if you're looking at an enterprise scale and adjusting, even making some modest adjustments to kind of what you're doing based on kind of a clearer version of the truth can have significant value in the outcome. So Scott kind of alluded to the Disney presentation. These are the breakouts that we have here. So in the Disney presentation, we're going to be going through, showing you a lot of what that journey looked like for Disney over the last two years, or 2 to 3 years. For MetLife, they've really been focusing on kind of how do we build this top-down and this bottom-up piece together, and the different tracks that they have around that, and how are they bringing that together. And then finally, the Universal is really focusing around digital, and how do you combine the right testing and validation with a sophisticated kind of model-based approach as well. So definitely invite you guys to attend the session that makes sense for you. So thanks.